So we always need this lovely intro that we know when also our online participants are live with us here. So we are not only talking to this beautiful audience, but also to people who are joining us online. Next to me, I'm very happy to welcome Victoria from the Berghof Foundation. Thank you so much for joining me after this hard to take in film, I would say. It's the first time I watched it, I was, despite knowing all these pictures, it really brought back the horrors of World War II and in particular the Holocaust. How was it for you to watch the film? I mean, you're confronted with conflicts every day in your work.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, I spent a little bit of time working on issues around Rwanda. So for me, this was also incredibly, I'm still taking in what I've seen actually, but it raises so many questions about the role of film, but also the role of reconciliation, of timing, of storytelling. And I think it's going to be incredible to think about this going forward, and I'm really happy to be here to be able to discuss it with you.
Thank you so much for joining me. I mean, if we talk about, at least that's for me, if I talk about the way Germany is handling the memorial of the Holocaust and also finding justice, it's always like, you guys did a good job. You built memorial centers, you're educating young people in it. In your work in conflict transformation, which role does art and storytelling and also in particular film play in like making people realize what happened?
That's a really good question actually, and I think even though we're a conflict transformation organization, the role of art, the role of storytelling, the ritual of storytelling is really central to reconciliation and to dealing with the past processes. And you're holding in your hand one of kind of the evidence of how we use filmmaking and storytelling to deal with the past. And I can, if anybody wants to speak more about this was a film that we made also talking with women who were they were combatants themselves in various conflicts and using film and storytelling to get their message across. And we're here at a retrospective of Ben Ferenz, and he speaks very eloquently and uses his stories and his experiences to tackle dealing with the past and reconciliation.
I was in an extremely lucky position to being able to talk with Ben a few months ago. As I said in the intro before the film, he's now 102 years ago, and we in particular spoke about that film. And he was like, oh yeah, I remember, because he was not only the one of the chief prosecutors of the Nuremberg trials, he was also, before that, collecting evidence in concentration camps. And he remembered the film crews, and he also remembered that it was essential showing the Germans what has happened, so they couldn't deny it. So in your work nowadays, do you think that having the evidence, in particular on pictures, changes the narrative around reconciliation and helps people to find a way to deal with it also?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely the case, and I think particularly the fact that at the end of the film they spoke about the fact that this footage was put away for so long is a really important issue, because film is very powerful, stories are very powerful, but with reconciliation, one of the central premises of reconciliation and reconciliation processes is building relationships, is dealing with the relationships of those people who are most affected by conflict. And seeing something like this is a matter of timing as well. And so it's such powerful imagery, and one has to be very careful also as to when this is shown for issues around re-traumatization of victims. but also in the aftermath of not only the Holocaust, but of many of the conflicts that we work in, people are just trying to figure out how to rebuild or build new relationships, how to gain sustainable peace. And I think this kind of film is incredibly powerful and useful, not only for dealing with the past, but also for preventing these happening again.
I mean, after the Holocaust, there was developed a really large library with statements of Holocaust survivors. We have seen that also done in other conflicts afterwards, where it was kind of a role model for them. Even if the Holocaust is like uncomparable, the way it was dealt with gave some inspiration points for, I think, other survivors of grave crimes. In your work with Berghof Foundation, which role play testimonies of survivors of conflicts, and do you use them in your work?
That's a really interesting question. And I also, before Berghof, I was a lawyer. So when you say testimony, I've dealt with a lot of witness testimony. The storytelling elements and dialogue. So using story and dialogue to not only to deal with the past in the future, so to speak, but we also use testimonies, stories, and dialogue as a way to already make people think about how they will deal with the past, what justice will look like already at the stage of peace processes and peace negotiations. And the additional way that we use people's stories, not only victims, but also those, the nature of conflict has changed dramatically in the last 50 years, and it's no longer, conflict parties are no longer as black and white, or as black and white as we had 50 years ago with intrastate conflicts. So we also use the stories, the testimonies of people who themselves are affected by conflict in a different role than victims, so that they learn from each other. And I'm reminded of something that Ben Ferencz himself says a lot, and that's the role of all of us is to make war far less attractive than peace is, and these stories and using people's testimonies is one way of doing that.
Absolutely. I think we should, when I read this quote by him, I was like, yeah, people are less interested in peace than in war, and it's horrible. My next question would be, we talk a lot about justice, and I mean, in Germany, there was an approach of justice with the Nuremberg trials, but if we talk about justice, what would it mean for people affected by grave crimes, and how could it look like? Because we have the International Criminal Court, and Ben was a driving force behind that, and it is a very important institution with very limited capacities. So with the people you are working with, what's their aim if they talk about justice?
Yeah, that's an incredibly complex, complex question, actually, because and the fact that we're talking about justice in a human rights setting as well, I think goes to the heart of what justice looks like at the moment. And justice is no longer just retribution or prosecutions, but justice is always also reconciliation processes, figuring out ways to prevent crimes. And so I think when you look at justice, it's no longer either or. And with the Nuremberg trials, I mean, Ben asked not for the death penalty, but for this international recognition of human rights. And justice has so many layers and is a very central part of reconciliation processes and a lot of the work that we do at the Berghof Foundation.
We have a lovely audience here in Berlin, and I was wondering if everyone also, anyone,
feel free.
anyone would have a question. We do have a microphone. Feel free to use it. I give you a second. I realize I'm sometimes too quick. Yeah, no? Okay, go. I do have more questions. I always do. That's the beauty of my job. I'm allowed to ask interesting people questions. If we talk about Berghof Foundation, we did have your director, Andrew Gilmore, last year here at the forum, and I thought it was very interesting what he said, because he said that your work does not only start after conflicts, but you also work a lot in conflict prevention. And when we listen to Ben Ferencz, and when he's saying we should give peace more power than war, I think conflict prevention is a very essential part. Could you give us a bit of insights of how conflict prevention could look like, and also where storytelling comes in there?
Well, I can speak particularly to the work that I do. So I work with supporting women from non-state armed groups, or what we call resistance and liberation movements, during peace processes or in the preparation for peace processes. And that's a lot of the work that Berghof does, is giving technical capacity building support to conflict parties, very multi-partial methodologies that we use, and working on prevention by supporting peace processes, so working towards a negotiated settlement rather than an armed end to conflict. And a lot of that with the work that I do is peer-to-peer exchange, so showing stories, having discussions and dialogues about the realities of what peace may look like, what negotiation can look like, and these are very powerful tools.
During our forum next week, which is our 4-day conference on storytelling and human rights, we're also going to have one panel on women in peace negotiation. And as you just mentioned that, I thought that would be a nice intro in our conference next week. Why do you think it's so important? That's a bit off topic. I hope everyone in the room forgives me. I'm just nosy right now. But why do you think that it's so important to support, in particular, women in those kind of processes? Mm-hmm. If we look at the peace process in the past, it was very often at the table, very male-driven. Mm-hmm. Where comes there the female perspective in?
Yeah, I mean, the female perspective and the voices of all marginalized groups are so central to every stage of peace negotiations, peace processes, and then the transitions themselves. And depending on what part of the peace process or the peace spectrum we're looking at, women play an absolutely essential role. They often are the ones who bear the brunt of much of the conflict, but they bring in a different perspective as well. And so it's incredibly important to ensure that the voices of women and other marginalized groups are really included and represented and seen. And I think a sustainable peace and the future that's peaceful cannot happen if all of those voices are not present at the table and part of those processes.
I tried again. Any questions from the room? Please feel really free. Otherwise, I have 2 last questions, but there's a wonderful, beautiful microphone. Oh, okay. Sure? Yeah, Douglas. Very welcome. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. I guess the question is more of a commentary about, or for you to comment on the impact that, I mean, seeing this footage it's overwhelming. And I think we constantly, as media creators, we're wrestling with the choice of when to show something or when not to show it, and what type of impact that footage would have on the audience or on the issue. And I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit on, I guess, the debate that continues to happen now in terms of the way news is reported and how it's different in different parts of the world, where, or even on social media, where a tragedy will happen, something gruesome will unfold. And depending upon who publishes that footage, the reaction is very different. Or sometimes if you think of, we just had the 9/11 anniversary, and I do remember being in, certain footage was chosen to be almost omitted from the record because of what was unfolding, how gruesome it was. And that kind of editorial decision, the type of impact it has on society, how it shifts our connection to the issue, and how maybe, say, back in the past when this footage was shown to the German public, how it had an impact on the whole society. And what about now? What about the next situation, say, in Afghanistan? The type of footage that may be coming out of there now, what news will or will not show, and then maybe what we do or do not see on social media, and then that kind of it's asymmetrical in terms of how that would change our connectivity to issues. I don't know if that's not really a question. It's more of this is sort of like a topic to wrestle with, I think. And I'm curious about your thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to?
I can put it in a concrete question, maybe, because...
No, yeah, I was going to say you're the more of a media expert than I am.
I think for your question, we are currently actually missing a media expert on stage. We are going to discuss that, lucky enough, in our conference next week, but I think it's a very important question, and maybe something, I don't know if you can relate to it, but I was wondering, I know that as you are working on many active conflicts, I was wondering how news reporting influences your work. I think that's like the concrete question out of Douglas' statement.
Yeah, I'm kind of still pondering on the question, and I am not going to be able to give a very satisfactory answer, I'm afraid, because it is so far away from my area of expertise.
Absolutely understandable.
Yeah, but I think if I can maybe draw a little bit, or take a sidestep a little bit, I think this question of who tells the story, how is the story told, and the power that these stories will have, and the effect that they will have coming across really depends on so many factors, and it's a question that comes up time and time again in many of the processes that we play, because we as externals viewing these things and in seeking justice, for instance, we're limited in the impact that we can have, and whereas somebody who is telling a story from inside of a conflict, they have much more of an understanding of the relationships, of the nuances. And I think this is something away from media specifically, but something that does come up a lot of the time in our work as peace builders.
What I can say from the storytelling side, what I've observed as a film festival is that there is, lucky enough, a bigger conversation starting now about who tells the story, how to tell the story, and how the connection is. Please, we have another question or comment. I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask if, Victoria, you could tell us a little more about how you work with women and how you work with them so they tell their stories or are able to tell their stories. You said that you're using storytelling in your work with women in conflict, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so the book that Anna has in her hand is one of the examples of women and amplifying the voices of women in peace building. This is from 4 different conflict contexts. Women, former ex-combatants telling their experiences from when they were involved in the conflict themselves, but I think even more powerfully talking about their experiences after the transition processes and after the peace processes. And I think we, as Berghof, having been part of some of these conflicts in a peace building capacity, we can discuss, we can talk about the experiences and the things that we witness, but the most powerful connector, I think, of different rounds for different people are hearing the stories from the women themselves. And I think this is a really powerful tool. that we employ.
My last question to end it with hopefully something positive, I hope I'm on the right track there, is I was just thinking, you have this stories of these women collected. Does it also help you to inspire women or others who have just experienced it by hearing the stories of those who have already been through the process? Is there a way for them to connect, to learn, and also to get empowered or encouraged through the stories of others?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely last year was also the anniversary of 1325. We had a whole year of talking about women, peace and security, and these kind of books, stories were a great connector. But also, I think, and if I'm bringing it back to Ben again, but his work and recently he's trying to empower the youth, and these kind of tools are also, I think, a great way of connecting youth to the stories, youth in conflict areas, youth who may be in societies that have not yet dealt with the past, or where the past has not been properly dealt with, and hearing stories, hearing realities, not only this, but peace education is a really incredibly important element of the work that we do, and in dealing with the past, but looking towards the future.
Thank you so much for bringing it back to Ben. That gives me my end statement. I recently read again Ben's biography, and when you meant he's empowering the youth, I'm not that young anymore, but I was reading it, and he's a son of a refugee family of illiterate, analphabetic parents who made it from Hell's Kitchen in New York to Harvard to one of the most influential lawyers in the world. And for me, for example, reading his story was giving myself the impression about, like, Anna, what are you thinking? You can do everything because he did everything. And I think that's the beautiful message that we can learn from others in any way. So I can only repeat my recommendation from the beginning. Watch A Man Can Make a Difference about Ben Ferencz. It's a beautiful life story and so important, in particular in the German context. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this very important but also hard to take in film. Thank you, Victoria, so much for opening with me such a broad range of issues. That was very beautiful, and I hope you all have a beautiful evening and join us soon again here at the Human Rights Film Festival Berlin. Thank you.
Thank you.